big mind. That's one way the Hermetics referred to what we would now call God or the divine or the sacred ultimate, what have you. They also referred to God as big mystery and the one with a capital O. So what did they write, think, feel, perceive about the ultimate? That's what our topic is today. And I want to start by giving you a very brief quotation from Book 9 of the Corpus Hermeticum. The cosmos has its own sense and understanding. The cosmos has its own sense and understanding. So let's stay with that for a minute. The cosmos, from a Hermetic point of view, is the visible manifestation of something that's beyond visibility. Almost like a thought or an emanation or an idea of God, from God. So let's go to the secret book of John to bring in this time a Gnostic source. And when you hear this, think about too what it says in other sacred books and other traditions, like especially some of the Upanishads of India. This is along the lines of what's been called in Christendom the via negativa, the negative way of understanding what God is, the reason for which is we're unable to say really in a positive sense what God is because we don't know. So from this perspective, it can be hubristic to claim that we do know. We're confronted with a big mystery, which is the Hermetic term. So this is from the sacred book of John. There's more to it than what I'm going to read you. So you might want to look it up. You can see it online as well if you want. The one, capital O, is without boundaries. Nothing exists outside of it to border it. The one cannot be investigated. Nothing exists apart from it to investigate it. The one cannot be measured. Nothing exists external to it to measure it. So much for a scientific approach. The one cannot be seen, for no one can envision it. The one is eternal, for it exists forever. The one is inconceivable, for no one can comprehend it. The one is indescribable, for no one could put any words to it. And these are in quotation marks, not perfect, not blessed, not divine, but superior to such concepts. Neither physical nor unphysical, neither immense nor infinitesimal. It is impossible to specify in quantity or quality, for it is beyond knowledge. Very similar to what's said elsewhere. And there's a line of thought that when Gnosticism and Hermeticism got going in and near Alexandria, that there was possibly an influence from India as well. It looks like there might have been. We know that there were Buddhist missionaries in Alexandria at that time. And we also know about the Silk Road and ships from it going to the port of Alexandria. There's all kinds of possibilities for cultural infusion here. And there's something about the presence of Alexandria itself, I think even to this day, that makes it a unique cauldron of cultures and worldviews and spiritual practices. And it's like this big alchemical container in which all kinds of interesting things mix and new products arise. So in any case, that's what one Hermetic source, Gnosticism as a branch of Hermeticism, says. It's consistent with what we see across the Hermetica. So in terms of the journey to have some sense of this vast, impossible divine presence, one way of describing it is that the soul's quest begins with some sort of a ritual immersion in a vat of water, a kind of baptism, which may have come into Christianity from Gnosticism. A baptism was a Gnostic ritual. And the water symbolically represents the cosmic mind. And then there's some kind of spiritual or visionary flight through the various realms, starting on Earth and going through the sublunar and to the higher realms, all the way up to the 8th, the realm of fixed stars. And then ultimately to the 9th, where the person being initiated sings to God and then embraces a silence that is itself a form of presence. And so at this point, according to Corpus Hermeticum, Book 5, the initiate says, out of gnosis, out of deep experiential knowing, you are whatever I am. You are whatever I make. You are whatever I say. You are everything, and there is nothing else. What is not, you are as well. You are all that has come to be. You are what has not come to be. You are the mind with a capital M who understands. Now, elsewhere in the Corpus Hermeticum, it also says, mankind, humanity, fashions its gods in its own image. That shouldn't be held too reductively to mean it's all a human projection. It means something more like what depth psychologists call a personification, that the various aspects of the divine take form in the psyche, and then they show up in art and ritual, and the different cultures have different take on their various gods and so on, and spirits, and that quote, by the way, is from the Asclepius, and its deeper sense, I believe, is to say, God is not reducible to a personification. There are millions of versions of God, of the gods, and none of them captures the essence, because the essence cannot be captured. God is not a dad, a stern dad. God is not an uncle. God is not this or that deity, according to this perspective. It's more like the ground of all these images is divine. So what's the point in arguing over them? Now, one way, as I mentioned earlier, that this big mind shows up is as the cosmos itself. And I think of Catherine Keller's work, and actually the title of one of her books, when I think of the Hermetic dictum that the cosmos is the body of God. And there's also a saying that goes with this from the Hermetica, all is one. And that's a formula that seems to go back even to ancient Egyptian times. It doesn't start with Hermeticism. And among its many other meanings, it's a way of saying that the divine is both transcendent and immanent. So given all this, how can we possibly experience anything of God? So before I dive into this, kind of a disclaimer, I guess, or maybe a clarification is a better way of saying it. It's a favorite target of militant atheists in particular to claim that all knowledge of God is just an illusion or a delusion. And I want to clarify that what the Hermeticum isn't doing is making a hard knowledge claim. It's saying more, both in terms of content and context, that if you go through certain things, if you do certain things rather, then you might have a sense of something sacred permeating your consciousness. What it is, we don't know. So it's more like that. Let me mention two of these paths in particular. One is referred to by a saying that's both Jewish and Egyptian, and it talks about the eyes of the heart. And so in book 7 of the Corpus Hermeticum, it actually says, look up with the eyes of the heart. And the idea is that we can get some glimpse of the divine through nous, through creative consciousness, as we experience it directly in the heart. And in the same book, one of the criticisms of leading a life of just wanton pleasure is that it numbs our senses, both outer and inner, to what they should naturally be able to perceive. So if our senses are clear, if our perceptions and our consciousness are cleansed, then with nous, with this bridge between us and big mind, we should be able to get some sense of what's there. That's the idea. And so another quotation that takes this a little bit farther. But if you cannot see what is within, how can God, who is himself, pardon the gendered language, how can God, who is himself within you, appear to you through your eyes? So here I want to turn to somebody I've mentioned before, the great Sheikh Ibn Arabi. And this is from his book of Theophanies. And I quote, and it's as though the sense of big mind, or whatever we want to call it, is talking to him as he's writing. And it says, I have created perception in you only in order to be the object of my perception. It's even Arabi and others in his tradition, but especially him, have this exquisite sense that it's not just we're passive children and then God shines down into us. It's this ongoing deepening conversation, relationship. It's beyond verbal. It's experienceable, but not describable. And the idea is that through our consciousness, God sees God reflected. And that may be even one of the reasons we're here. And so Carl Jung talks about this a little bit in his book, Answer to Job. Jung was familiar with the scholar Henri Corbin. He had talked to him at Eranos about this. And Corbin is, among other things, a scholar of Ibn Arabi's work. So that's where this idea comes from. So in the book of Theophanies, it also says, it is through my eyes, this is the divine speaking, it is through my eyes that you see me and see yourself. Why can you not reach me through the object you touch? In other words, through everyday experiences, or breathe me through sweet perfumes? Why do you not see me? Why do you not hear me? For if you approach me, it is because I have approached you. Be mine, be for me, as you are in me. So in some ways, it's not a matter so much of, some people are on a search for God. Where do I find God? How do I sense God and all that? From this perspective that these quotations come from, it's more that the very seeking is itself an expression of the presence. So I want to wrap up by giving you one more quotation here. This one's from the Corpus Hermeticum, book 12. And so seeing with the eyes of the heart is one path, through nous, through gnosis, through deep consciousness, and being patient and waiting. And I pointed out in a different video, I quoted Thomas Merton's last book, where he talks about how when you're in deep contemplation, the darkness, the silence themselves, suddenly there's a switch and they become forms of presence. And if you've actually experienced this, you know exactly what he's talking about. So the seeker becomes sought and witnessed. There's a sense of being witnessed rather than looking at something. And then one can rest in that. So anyway, this quotation from the Corpus Hermeticum delineates a second path, which is to appreciate God shining through the creation itself. Behold the cosmos and observe matter to contemplate God. Whether you speak of matter, body, or essence, know that these are themselves activities of God. That the activity that is matter is God's material nature. That the activity that is body is God's bodily nature. And that the activity that is essence is God's essential nature. And this is God, the all.